Your doctor is in, and today we're doing a Mythbuster style experiment to see whether speaker cables and power cables affect your tube amp tone. Most people don't believe that they make a difference, but I thought we would do a real controlled experiment to see what the impact is. So we'll start with audio recordings that I took at a professional studio, Redwire Studios in Lake Forest. And unlike most other cable comparison videos where they have different performances, I've reamped the same exact signal through the chain and took every consideration to make it as equal as possible. No movement of the microphone. The power cable was plugged in exactly the same outlet. The speaker cable was plugged in exactly the same jack on the amp. No EQ differences, nothing. So we're going to finally hear a really controlled experiment of whether speaker cables and power cables make a difference. So let me first introduce the cables. For speaker cables, we have my trusty Monster Performer ProLink 500, something like that. I've used this for years. I think it has gold-plated tips and all that. Then we have an extra thick, fat GLS speaker cable that is 12 AWG. It's about $15. The Monster, it was more, I don't remember, but maybe 30, 40 bucks. Then for the power cables, we got this extra fat 12 AWG cable from Mercury Magnetics. I think it's their Super HD or something. I'll put the actual name on the video. Versus a thin power cable that I got from some kind of amp at some point that is 18 WG. So from here on forth, the power cables I'm going to refer to as just the thick one versus the thin one. And for the speaker cables, I'm going to refer to them as the GLS versus the Monster. So let's start out by listening to the different recordings, see if we can judge with our ears first. And then I'll go into looking at the frequency analyzer and show whether or not there are any volume differences. So let's start listening. Okay, we listened to the different tracks. So now that you might have made an auditory judgment, let's look at the frequency analyzer to see what that shows us. We'll start with the thick power cable and the Monster speaker cable. And this is just that track soloed and sort of during the more chuggy part. And so you see that the lows are going all the way down to about 35 hertz. It's relatively flat. We get some extra low end when I'm chugging. And then it goes all the way up to about 15 kilohertz. Now I've duplicated that track and put it out of phase so that when we play them together in this group, you'll see that we have nothing going on here because they perfectly phase cancel. But if I play the track with the different speaker cable, but the same power cable, and I put one of those out of phase, then you can see that there are some frequency differences between the two tracks. So it's mostly in this, I'm going to say 3 to 6K range. Little bit of a few little peaks here, one around 600. So that's just with the different speaker cable. And if I go to the different power cable and the different speaker cable, oops, let me flip them out of phase. Then you see that there's even more activity, especially in the low end here, around 150, 300 hertz, I think on the chugs. There's something different there, and we also see the same differences around 600 and then this upper region. If we look at just the thick versus thin power cable using the same monster speaker cable, then we don't have as much low end activity. Our peaks are more in the 600 to 800 range, and there's always some kind of differences up here from 2 to 6K. So the point of this is just to show that there are some small differences as shown by the frequency analyzer. So you might be wondering, well, what if there are volume differences? That we know that if you're doing an A-B and something's louder, you usually will prefer that. So I went ahead and documented the peak levels for each of the riffs. And I made this little chart here. Let's see if, yeah, I think that's in focus now. So we have the power cables, thick versus thin, and then the speaker cables, monster and GLS, and then the 3 different riffs. The differences are really small. This is with the levels of everything just set at 0, exactly how they were recorded. And when there are differences, like in the first riff, maximum it's 0.2 dB different, but for the most part, maybe it's 0.1 dB different. And the main pattern I'm seeing here is that with the thick power cable, especially for riff 1 and riff 3, we have up to a 0.2 dB difference, with the loudest one being the thick power cable and the monster speaker cable, and the quietest being the GLS and the thin power cable. Those level differences happen to match my preferences, so I like the thick power cable and the monster speaker cable the best. And it's hard. It's something that I experience in the room. It sort of feels slightly different, and when in band practice at volume, I showed my bandmates, and all of us heard the small difference with the thick power cable. So your mileage may vary for sure. You may not hear any differences depending on the quality of your speakers that you're listening through, whether you have monitors or headphones or whatever. And I'll be the first to admit that these differences are really small. You know, part of it could be just the volume differences that I outlined here, the very small ones, but 0.1 should be almost imperceptible. You can decide on your own whether it matters to you. The investment you might make in these cables, or at least the ones I've shown, is pretty small, so it's not a massive cost if you want to experiment. When you combine all these pieces of evidence together, the small difference in the recording, the frequency analyzer, the dB slight difference, I think it's safe to say that there is something very small. This is just what I think. What I really wanted to do was just do a more controlled experiment and show you all evidence of whether there is a difference or not, and to what extent that might exist. So I hope this helps you. I really want to know what you think. I'm wondering if you can hear the differences through your speakers or your headphones. If you want more of these sort of like rigorous experiment videos, I actually had a lot of fun making this, and I would definitely do more. So just let me know in the comments, and if there's something else you want me to explore, leave a suggestion and I'll see if I can do it. Thanks so much for checking this out. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.